Recently, there have been anonymous publications discussing countries that do not want Ukraine in NATO, including a list of several European nations. In addition to Germany, 5 other countries were mentioned. Now we are hearing the skeptical position of the German Chancellor regarding Ukraine's NATO membership.
Інформаційного агентства Politico. І ось зараз ми бачимо і чуємо позицію канцлера Німеччини, яка виявляється справді такою україноскептичною.
Scholz emphasizes that he has no plans to change this position. Does this mean that to change Germany's position, we need to wait for the elections next fall when the government and chancellor will change?
Виборів восени наступного року, коли уряд і канцлер у Німеччині зміняться.
Andriy, please note that among those European skeptics about Ukraine's prospects, there are indeed 4 out of 7 that we know well. These are the United States of America, Germany, Hungary, and Slovakia. We certainly did not know the 3 that were added to them, Belgium, Slovenia, and Spain, but now we do. This is the smallest list of the 7 countries that do not yet consider it appropriate to extend an invitation NATO to Ukraine. As for Scholz's statement, there is a twofold answer. First, of course, to us Ukrainians. The Ukrainians do not like such a statement in an ultimatum, so to speak, that Ukraine will not be offered NATO membership until the war is over. On the other hand, if we analyze all our broadcasts and pre-war speeches, we knew perfectly well that a country that is actively engaged in hostilities and is at war cannot be admitted to NATO. There is nothing new here from NATO. The other issue is that we hope to at least get an invitation with the actual accession postponed indefinitely until the war is over, in order to strengthen Ukraine's position in possible peace talks with Russia. We need Ukraine's position to be strong so that we can negotiate with Russia from a position of strength, and so that it cannot demand any concessions, and has no illusions that Ukraine will give up NATO. Of course, the leadership of the state would like to receive such an invitation on an expedited basis, but I have noted that this is very unlikely. If we manage to get such an invitation after the announcement of the U.S. election results, when we know exactly who won, and if Kamala Harris wins, then perhaps by the summer summit in July 2025 in The Hague, symbolic for Russia, Ukraine will be invited if a consensus is reached with all countries. We previously mentioned Slovakia and Hungary, but the list of countries opposing Ukraine's NATO membership is longer. Western journalists now say Ukraine can hope for an invitation only after the U.S. election results, as everyone is waiting to see whether Trump or Harris wins, given their opposing policies and strategies. So, on the one hand, I didn't seem to hear anything new, but we all nevertheless wanted and hoped that the West would change its position and be able to extend an invitation to Ukraine. Unfortunately, this did not happen, but we already knew that the United States and Germany were 2 of Ukraine's most vocal opponents. Who clearly stated that Ukraine must fulfill at least 2 conditions for joining NATO: end the war and do its homework. I repeat this in every broadcast, and unfortunately, nothing has changed from what Scholz said. We knew and understood all this very well, but we believed that maybe their position had changed. We mentioned several countries, including Germany, the US, Hungary, Slovakia, Belgium, Slovenia, and Spain. However, our sources in the President's office say the situation is different, and only the US and Germany need to be convinced, as there is already support from most alliance members if backed by these 2 countries.
тільки Сполучені Штати і Німеччину, тому що з більшістю членів альянсу є наступне розуміння: якщо підтримують Сполучені Штати та Німеччина, то НАТО...
One way or another, NATO will lean toward the necessary strong position. So it is incorrect to talk about 7 opponents of Ukraine's rapid accession to NATO, regardless of their number. The main obstacles to inviting Ukraine to NATO are the positions of the United States and Germany. We heard Scholz's views yesterday, and with U.S. presidential elections approaching, many statements are being made. What could convince the Germans and Americans to extend at least an invitation to Ukraine, even amid the ongoing invasion? Such an invitation would be a significant step forward. And a signal to the Russian Federation that we are moving in this direction. Look, I want to put all the dots of hope in perspective, if you'll allow me to do so very briefly. It is true what they say on Bankova Street, that the key opponents in the leadership of the Ukrainian state are the United States and Germany. If the U.S. changes its position, other countries would likely follow, as Britain and France are already allies. If the U.S., Britain, France, and Germany decide to invite Ukraine to NATO, skeptics within NATO would feel pressure from these 4 major powers. I completely agree with this.
З іншого боку, ця інформація, яка була оприлюднена, її не з пальця, як кажуть, висмоктало. Це була отримана інформація з високопоставлених працівників, чиновників штабу.
On the other hand, the information that was made public was not pulled out of thin air. This was information received from high-ranking NATO headquarters officials, at least 3 or 4 people who independently confirmed this information and named this set of countries, and no one made them up.
Но має відбутися одна ключова подія, яка має принести Україні приємну радість, умовно через тиждень, коли ми довідаємося результати.
For Germany and Scholz to change their position on inviting Ukraine to NATO, a key event is needed: the results of the U.S. presidential election in a week's time. If Trump wins, our current discussions will lose significance, as he has repeatedly stated that he and his entourage oppose Ukraine's NATO membership. Trump believes that Biden's mistake was his promises to Ukraine. Ukraine was invited to join NATO, but its accession is delayed. He is very aggressive against NATO itself. He has argued that NATO is a relic of the Cold War, that it should be dismantled, and that the United States should be withdrawn from NATO. In his opinion, the United States should not defend European countries. Let them finance, maintain, and protect themselves. I believe Trump's policy hasn't changed. He sincerely opposes Ukraine and will pursue this stance. We must recognize that he is an enemy of Ukraine, and our citizens need to understand what they might face after the January 20th inauguration if he returns to power. This is a different issue. Different prospects are opening up for Ukraine. If Kamala Harris wins, and before January 20th, there will be a difficult path through a civil war that Donald Trump, as well as Russian extremists and provocateurs who will undermine stability and resilience in the United States, will certainly arrange. America, the FBI, and the National Guard, as well as their intelligence agencies, must prepare for this. This is their issue, but it will not be possible to avoid it. If Trump loses, he will try to disrupt the internal peace in the United States, as criminal cases are being opened that could lead to 700 years in prison. He has nothing to lose.
Ну і в таких умовах, якщо приходить Камала Харріс після інаугурації, після 20 січня, коли вона сформує весь свій уряд, а в неї на посаду держсекретаря, до речі, є відомий політик, який є палкий перехідник.
If Kamala Harris takes power after January 20th, her Secretary of State may be a well-known politician supportive of Ukraine's NATO membership. While I don't recall his name, his approval could open new horizons for Ukraine. At the Hague summit, Ukraine might receive an invitation, albeit with a delayed accession date. We won't remind you of the rest, because it will turn into a guessing game. We do realize that we need to wait for the U.S. presidential election. Another topic actively discussed in the media is the involvement of NATO troops in the war in Ukraine and possible ways of doing so. Why did this topic come up again? Yesterday, intelligence reported that on October 23rd, several thousand soldiers of the DPRK army were already in the war. The number of soldiers is likely to increase due to an agreement. Allies and Western media are discussing Emmanuel Macron's proposal to send troops to Ukraine, believing it could change the situation without crossing a red line. However, there is no political consensus among EU and NATO countries on how or if to use these troops in Ukraine. Can this consensus be reached? Could NATO troops be involved in the war in Ukraine in some way? If we don't have to wait for an invitation and membership, then maybe this is the way we can end this war faster. There is nothing evil that cannot turn into good. Even despite the negative information that the DPRK is sending troops to Russia to confront Ukraine, I think there are positive factors in this. The first positive factor is the change in the philosophy and doctrine of war. If earlier it was limited to clashes between Russia and Ukraine, and no one wanted to interfere, not wanting to be a subject of this war, now that the DPRK is entering this war, as soon as its first soldier is on the territory of Ukraine, and will be captured, or there will be evidence that we can demonstrate at the United Nations in the UN Security Council, where the United States, Britain, France, as permanent representatives of the UN, with the help of South Korea, will help and make this information public. If the Ukrainian side discloses all this there, it will open huge gateways of assistance to Ukraine. The DPRK troops won't change the war's course or significantly affect Ukraine's defense, but they could draw the international community, especially South Korea and its powerful military-industrial complex, into the conflict. I've previously noted that South Korea's military-industrial complex is comparable to NATO's in Europe. If, for example, Trump wins in the United States and blocks aid to Ukraine, no one will replace this aid in full. Certainly not 100% of the U.S., but to a large extent, countries such as South Korea can help Ukraine by compensating for the shortfalls that the U.S. will not provide. Furthermore, the DPRK will demonstrate to Japan through its war in Ukraine that the DPRK is an aggressive party, and Japan may also be more willing to help Ukraine, again opening the floodgates of military aid. Together, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand, which are also confronting China and North Korea in the Pacific region, can help Ukraine more. U.S. congressmen are urging Biden to remove all obstacles and provide maximum assistance to Ukraine, including unblocking long-range weapons to help destroy DPRK troops. The U.S. offers strategic support and security guarantees to South Korea against North Korea, including nuclear protection for South Korea and Japan in GRA.
це війна, бо за них заступається парасолька Сполучених Штатів Америки, яка їх захищає, в тім числі і ядерну безпеку забезпечує
The event of an attack.
цій країні, Південній Кореї і Японії у випадку, якщо на них нападе Північна Корея.
Europe and NATO, particularly France and Britain, were eager to help Ukraine, but they were held back by Washington and Scholz. Now Washington and Scholz no longer have the leverage to hold back the necessary assistance to Ukraine.
Повністю втрачаються будь-які важелі і аргументи стримувати себе і своїх партнерів в наданні допомоги всеосяжної.
And all those requests that Ukraine is making give us permission to hit Russia at maximum distances and provide more weapons in a wider range. Hundreds of billions of dollars could be realized. It is also very important to note that it is NATO troops, NATO countries, individual NATO countries. I want to emphasize that not all of NATO can go into Ukraine and help Ukraine. No, it is only, let's say, individual British military units, specialists, instructors, and French, maybe someone else will want to go to Ukraine. For example, it would be very important for us to get at least 100 pilots for 100 aircraft from our Western allies to completely close the sky, at least as part of air defense, from their Shaheds and cruise missiles, and not to launch missile strikes with long-range Scalps, Storm Sheds, and Tauruses on the territory of the Russian Federation. If DPRK troops are deployed in Ukraine, it could soften Scholz's position, potentially allowing him to transfer long-range Taurus missiles to Britain. In return, Britain would provide Germany with stormtroopers, subsequently assisting Ukraine with the German Tauruses. Essentially, Germany wouldn't give directly to Ukraine. Instead, they would send the missiles to Britain, which could then help Ukraine use them against Russia. That is, the involvement of the DPRK troops against Ukraine, if proven, is a fact that can be used to accuse Russia, the DPRK, and all its allies, China and Iran. It must be understood that the DPRK could not have entered Russia and fought against Ukraine on its own without Chinese sanctions. Kim Jong-un would never have dared to do so, and here China secretly allows Kim to use its troops, at least 12,000, against Ukraine. At the same time, in Kazan, he states that the war in Ukraine cannot be allowed to escalate, that it is impossible to wage war, that the terms of the UN Charter must be respected, and that this war must be stopped. With one hand, he secretly encourages the participation of DPRK troops in the war against Ukraine. And then at the summit, he publicly says that he is fighting to limit hostilities and end the conflict, as well as for the next peace summit. This is China's cynical realpolitik. China is not a neutral country or a peacemaker. China is helping Russia in its war against Ukraine. And our viewers should clearly and distinctly realize this. In my opinion, when North Korea started moving troops into Russia and China did not intervene, even our citizens who had illusions about China were dismayed. They have dissipated. Mr. Romaniuk, we thank you for joining us, as always, for the emotional conversation about international politics. Yuriy Romaniuk was with us.